Welcome, everyone, to the Heart Talk podcast, coming to you every Monday, 10 p.m., Heart Knox Training Center in Malaysia. Uh, you're welcome to share to the audience who is with us tonight. You're welcome to share your learning and leave any questions that you have for our guests, Grayson James, in the comment section. Now, today, our guest, very special guest, Grayson James. I will ask you to introduce yourself because I don't know if I can do such a good job, as good a job as you. So, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure, happy to, Danush. Grayson James. I am the head of Samurai Game Associates based in Northern California, and we represent the Leonard Family Trust, which is the owner of the Samurai Game. And the Samurai Game was created by George Leonard back in 1977. And I learned the game from George in the 1980s. And for the last 13 years have been in this role, previously with my partner Lance Giroux, who has since retired, and now that job falls to me. And in addition to that, for the past 35 years or so, I have been a organizational consultant and coach, working with organizational leaders and their teams, helping them to improve their collaborative performance.
Mm. Yes. So, uh, for the audience, I recently met Grayson about half a year ago, somewhere in October last year, in the most recent facilitator training program in Malaysia. Um, it was great meeting Grayson, and I'm a recently certified facilitator. So it's great to have this conversation with you, Grayson.
It's great to be here with you.
Thank you for coming on with us. So I think there are quite a number of questions revolving Samurai Game. Whenever I bring it up with friends and family, whenever we bring it up with some graduates here in our training center, people ask, what is the Samurai Game? What is it all about? Because it's really hard to explain.
It is. It is hard to explain.
Yeah. So, in your words, yeah.
Well, whatever words we use, it will not quite convey the experience that somebody would have when they actually take the game. But we'll do our best here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the game is we call it an experiential simulation. It takes place over the course of 1.5 to 2 days. Typically, it can be a little shorter to 1 day, or it can be longer. And in this game, we invite folks to step out of their everyday routine, their normal way of being in the world, and enter into an imagined world, which is that of the medieval Japanese samurai. And the reason we do that is, as I alluded to, it's not habitual. It's a world that is very foreign to us. And when we do that, it has a different set of rules, different set of customs, expectations. When we no longer can fall back on all of the things that we normally think and do in our daily lives, it creates an opportunity for learning that's very different. So that's really what the Samurai Game is about. It's an opening, it's an opportunity for people to experience themselves in a very non-ordinary context. And what happens when we do that is we get to see ourselves differently. We get to put on new eyes, and things about our normal ways of thinking and being and doing reveal themselves in much more clear ways. So it's a very exciting and engaging way of looking at ourselves, being able to see. It's like a mirror in that sense. It gives us a new glimpse into how do we do what we do in the world, and what are the things that we might want to change? What do we want to be able to do more of, be more of, do less of, be less of?
Um, I've heard a lot of experiences from other participants and even from myself where people would see themselves in a different light, and they would see both the stuff that they like about themselves and the stuff that they don't like, and they have a choice after the samurai game how to go about that moving forward. Uh,
I really like
and
that word choice, Danush. Let's not let go of that one.
right, because um, when people ask what are what are the desired outcomes of the samurai game, right? I tend to get a little bit stuck in answering that question because in my experience, I don't know how much of it said about this. Uh, in my experience, is that it's not really fixed. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, and I like that you get a little bit stuck because to me, that points to something about the nature of the game and how different it is to be a facilitator of the samurai game than to do many other things that we do. And yeah, it is the game is always different. There is a samurai game. There is the design of the game, the structure, the flow that George Leonard designed and that we teach, that you learned as part of the samurai game facilitator training last year. And yet, uh, within that structure, the game is always different. And what people will get out of the game will always be up to them. So, from that perspective, it's very different than a training. It's not coaching, it's not instruction, it's not teaching. What we are doing, what you are doing as a facilitator, is you are really giving people an opportunity to learn whatever it is that they are going to learn, to have the experience that they will have. And everyone has an experience in the game, and that's for them to decide and have choice about as to how they feel about it and whether they want to pursue that or not. So it's a deeply respectful game in that sense. And that's also what's difficult about describing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because really has me boggled every time I have to ask the question. I love this answer because then I have a little bit of a template now that I can use.
Yeah.
um, so you mentioned George Leonard and that you knew him personally, you trained under him. Can you tell me and tell us a little bit about your journey into becoming to this point of where you are right now with regards to the samurai game, relationship with Leonard family trust?
Sure. Well, I was at the time I was in my mid 20s and I was running a private school system in the San Francisco Bay Area. We had 5 campuses around the Bay, different cities around the Bay Area: San Francisco, Berkeley, Marin County, and so forth. And we got a call to be interviewed for an article in Esquire magazine by this man named George Leonard. I did not know of George Leonard. He came and interviewed us, and he wrote an article about our schools in Esquire, and he called it a model school for the future. We were a private school system, and at the time was a very innovative program that we were running. And I was curious about this man. He was a very engaging human being, about 6'4", first of all, a big shock of gray hair, and carried himself, just very confidently. And it turns out he was a very well-known writer, not to me at that point, up until that point, but written a lot of several books, probably by then about 8 or 9 books, and had written many, many articles for Esquire magazine. And he was actually considered the godfather of the human potential movement, which is really something that you and I are both part of
Yeah.
through the Samurai Game and many other things that we do. Anyway, I became curious about this man. So one night when I went out of town for a weekend with my wife to get away, and I took a book of his called The Silent Pulse with me. And I started reading it that evening. And I didn't put it down until I was done into the middle of the night. I was just so lit up about this book. It just really moved me. And I told myself as I went to bed, I have to follow up with this guy. I have to learn about Aikido because he talks about Aikido a little bit. I just need to know this man better. So I got back in town a couple days later and I called him up and I said, "Hey, Mr. Leonard, we met at schools when you were researching our school for your article. Uh, can I take you to lunch and learn more about what you're doing?" He said, "No." And he said, "Why don't you instead, why don't you meet me at our dojo, our Aikido dojo in Mill Valley, which was across the bay from where I was living at the time." So I met him on a Wednesday night and I sat there on the bench watching this thing called Aikido, which I'd never seen before. I didn't know anything about it. And I was just completely mesmerized by this. I could not believe what I was seeing. This, the beauty of the movement and the one of the things that really struck me, and this is a common experience of Aikido when people watch Aikido for the first time, is you can't really tell after the initial attack who's the attacker and who's the defender. It all seems to kind of blend
Yeah.
into just one movement.
Like a
And that was
dance.
certainly my experience. I think George picked up on this. He saw me, he every now and then he came over and checked in. Well, what are you noticing? What are you seeing on the mat? And then at the end of class, he said, "Well, why don't we have lunch sometime?" So we went out to lunch, and that became a 25-year long, really deep relationship for me. I started training at the dojo and at another dojo in the community that I lived in at the same time a couple days later. And within a few months, I was training every day of the week and starting to go to Aikido camps and retreats. My wife and I started traveling around together. She also was doing Aikido. And I became his apprentice for a couple of years where I did the Samurai Game with him many times. I would travel with him for interviews. He would lead workshops and I would join him and assist. And as I grew through the ranks in Aikido, of course, I started to become a teacher at some point. And in 2010, my friend Lance, who was also in our dojo, different dojo at that point, asked me to help him lead Samurai Game Facilitator training programs for George, which I did because my career had taken me into this executive coaching and consulting track. So I was not as involved with the Samurai Game at that point, but I was always very connected with it and thought it was a fantastic offering. So that was about 13 years ago, and George passed away around that time. Leonard Family Trust became the owner of the game after George and George's wife passed a year later. And then since then, I've been working with George's three daughters, who are the Leonard Family Trust.
And so now you're charged with kind of keeping the work alive, training facilitators, coaching them along the way worldwide.
That's right. Yeah. When in 2010, when I joined Lance, there were about 35 facilitators, and now there are over 100, and in different parts of the world. And it's a great community, and we share I know you know this, you experience it. There's a bond between all of us, and a commitment to the game and to what the game represents. So for me, it's just a really satisfying uh, experience to be part of these training programs and see people go through over the 10 days. There's quite a metamorphosis that happens as people begin to see, oh, that's what the samurai game is. Oh, that is what it means to be a facilitator, because it's not a role that is very common in our in our world. We're used to being trainers, teaching people how to do this, how to do that, how to get on in the world in different ways, depending on what it is you're training, or coaching people, helping them to solve their problems. And there's always some agenda. And in the samurai game, the agenda is to allow the game to do the work and to trust the game. And that is not an easy thing to learn. But once you learn it, it's really liberating. And it's liberating and freeing for not only for the facilitators, of course, but for the participants. And that's the whole point of the game, is to provide this really beautiful context for people to learn whatever it is that they're going to learn in this intense environment of the what we call the battles in the samurai game.
Hmm. And as you're sharing about that, I had this sudden thought, um, and I'm not sure how much of sense this will make to the audience. Sometimes it's really hard to just do nothing.
It is. Yeah. It is. It is. It's isn't it interesting how that can be the most challenging thing for people? And that really is the most challenging thing in our facilitator training programs, is to to let folks realize that their job is really to be very present, very engaged, to know the material well, and to create an environment in which people can go wherever they're going to go within the confines of the structure of the game. That's the challenge for new facilitators, is to learn that and to recognize that the game is really it's an extraordinarily well designed game, and it does the work for you if you allow it to do that. Now, that doesn't mean you're passive at all. It's anything
Mhm.
but passive. I'm exhausted at the end of a game, and you may have experienced that too. And it's not because I'm not doing anything. It's because I'm working on paying attention in a different way than I usually pay attention, and really being there with everybody in the room, keeping an eye on all sorts of things, making subtle moves here and there that keep the game safe for people, keep the game moving, and give
Yeah.
people an opportunity to really enter into that environment, into that imagined world, and do what they do.
Mhm. Um, Sometimes when people are asking about the samurai game, uh, they ask, why is it called the samurai game? Do I become a samurai? Do I wear their armor? Do I use a sword? Why is it called? Why is it about the samurai?
Yeah. Well, let me go back to George for this. In World War II, George was an aviator. He was a combat pilot and flew fighter bombers in the Pacific. He fought against the Japanese. And when he came back to the States at the end of the war, he became a journalist for the Army. And then he became a journalist. He started writing books and became a journalist with a very famous magazine in the US in those days called Look Magazine. And he also was introduced to Aikido many years later, a couple decades after his flying experience in World War II. But he remained very intrigued by the Japanese culture. So for him, World War II opened his eyes to the Japanese culture. And while at the moment he was a combatant in that scenario, over time, he became more and more fascinated by the Japanese culture. And then when he was introduced to the martial art of Aikido, which is a Japanese martial art, he really threw himself into that and as a student. And he studied the the art itself, but also where does this fascinating art of Aikido come from? And it has its roots in ancient samurai Japan. The founder of Aikido uh, was trained in the lethal arts, several lethal arts that grew out of the samurai tradition. And uh, the samurai tradition really only ended about 150 years ago. It was not that long ago. It still has very strong roots in Japanese culture. So, as George was walking to the dojo one day, this is the story that he told. He got this idea that to take his Aikido class students through a game that he was inventing in the 15-minute walk to the dojo. He didn't have a name for it yet, but the broad strokes of the game were there, and people ended up being very profoundly impacted by it. So much so that the following week, although George had kind of forgotten about it, they said, "Hey, let's go back and do that game again." And the game is not a training to become a samurai. So you're not going to learn how to wield a sword. You're not even going to learn how to do martial arts. And you do not need to be a martial artist. You need no martial arts experience whatsoever, in fact. All you need to do is show up
Mm-hmm.
and show up with an open mind and some curiosity, and that's about it. And the game will not turn you into a martial artist. It will not turn you into a samurai. The context of the samurai is there are several things about it. One is that the samurai warriors were renowned for their ferocity and fierce demeanor, and also they were uh, deeply disciplined, not only in the arts of fighting, the martial arts, but they were disciplined and encouraged and strove to master other arts as well, including arts of the aesthetic, arts of governance, strategy, leadership. And it was a broad view of a well developed human being that the samurai modeled themselves after. Uh, the the discipline of continual learning and of continual cultivating the spirit of decisiveness and of courage and of integrity demanded also self-reflection, constant self-reflection. And that is reflected in the samurai game. The samurai game is really ultimately about how do we become more aware of ourselves? It's about awareness because that is the starting point for cultivating ourselves in new ways. In whatever ways we want to cultivate ourselves, it has to start with awareness. So the samurai game invites people to step into this imagined world of being samurai. And you join one army or the other. There are two armies, and they go into these symbolic battles. But there are lots of rules, and there are very specific roles which are modeled after the medieval samurai era. And these roles require certain ways of being and certain types of behaviors. And because it is so foreign to us, we constantly have to pay attention. Wait, is this allowed? Am I going to break this rule? How am I going to be managing myself with honor if I do this or that? How do I handle this situation? There are all of these dilemmas that show up, and that becomes the grist, the food for learning and for awareness that people get to work with in the samurai game. So really, the whole game is about self-awareness. It's not about becoming a samurai or learning to do this or that. It's about how do I become more aware who I am and what do I do when I'm faced with certain kinds of challenges?
Right. And you mentioned the word dilemmas. Um, and with each, I notice for myself, with each dilemma and every choice that I make in the game, I deal with consequences of each of those choices. And that itself also was very opening for me. It created a lot of opening for me in terms of taking a look at why I made the choice, knowing the consequences of each choice. I made them anyway. And that struggle actually was very powerful.
What was powerful about that for you, Danush? What did that struggle produce for you, do you think? I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Yeah, thanks. Struggle with integrity and what could well, there are rules, right? And some rules I can get away with it because what if nobody saw?
Mm,
Get away with breaking it because nobody's. But then I struggle with my personal integrity. Is like, hmm, I know of the rule, and having the struggle, whatever choice I made, it was very powerful because then I'm actually it's a battle within, and I noticed that how else in my life that I'm actually struggling with myself,
mm,
knowing there are certain areas in my life that I have this struggle with integrity for myself and noticing where else it happens. That was very powerful. That was very mind opening for me
mm.
in the game because I may make a choice to be in integrity in this game. Does this reflect elsewhere in my life? Am I doing the same side? Then after the game, I get to take a look. Okay, oh wow, here in my life I have the same struggle. Here in my life, I have the same struggle. What am I
Mm.
choosing there? So I found that the struggle had a lot of value because I'm actually thinking it's not automatic. Because, like you say, it's a very different environment. It's in the samurai game. It's so different that we're so not used to it that I felt like I'm being kind of like forced into really thinking about every choice that I make, and that may not be the case in life. In life normally, maybe making a lot of decisions, very snap decisions all the time, on automatic.
Mm, mm.
And the samurai game was a good wake up to certain habits.
Oh, I really
So that's
like that.
struggle.
Yeah, great.
Um,
I like that you talked about consequences because the of course everything we do has consequences, but as you were suggesting, we don't always make the connection between what we're doing and the consequences that we're going to experience downstream later on. So we can often go through much of our life doing things, making decisions, and not realize how those decisions are going to play out. And the thing about the samurai game is that it's just a game, as intense as it is in the moment, and people can sometimes experience it as very, very intense, all absorbing in the moment. And that's the power of the game. But ultimately, it gives people an opportunity, as you experienced, to do things, make decisions, behave in certain ways, and they'll get immediate consequences. In the samurai game, this is not really a spoiler. In the samurai game, those consequences could include you die in the game. There's life and death in the game. But because it's a game, of course, you get back up and you go on with your life when the game is over, and that's fine.
yeah,
And so it's a low risk way to do to have the kinds of experiences that you were describing. We get to actually see ourselves in a whole new light and see how we are shaping our lives and how the decisions we make and the choices we make really set in motion things that we may like that we have set in motion, and sometimes things we wish we'd never set in motion. But to really be able to see that clearly can be a real gift for people.
Yeah. And so far, we've talked a lot about how this will be valuable for the individual. Um, how do you think the Samurai game is valuable for organizations, for clients? How do you think that would serve them?
Well, there are a lot of different answers to that. One is it's uh, a really great way to connect with your colleagues in a totally uncommon, non-ordinary way. It's not another day at the office.
Hmm.
Is being with your colleagues in a completely different way, and you get to see them as human beings in a way that you very often do not ever get to see your colleagues unless you have very close relationships with them outside of work. And you get to also see how you will rely on them or not when challenges arise, when you have to rely on somebody in order to accomplish this or that. Who do you turn to and who turns to you? So you get feedback about how you show up for them and how they show up for you. You also, one of the things that happens is people start to see, oh my God, I had no idea this person had that leadership quality before. It's because they've never had an opportunity to show it. Or I had no idea how, what uh, a how much integrity this person really had when the going gets tough. So all of these things you start to just see new dimensions to each other, and you start to realize how you can work with each other, what collaboration can really look like when you absolutely have to collaborate in order to survive, to win in the samurai game. And that is not that different than in real life back at the office. It's just the stakes are different. And
Yeah.
again, the samurai game is a game. In the office, the stakes are different. The stakes are more real.
Mm. So I'm hearing that as a result of the Samurai game in teams and organizations, what could happen is because I see people on my team in a different light, or during the game and I start to see different things about them I may not have ever seen. It could change the dynamic of how I work with them moving forward and improve productivity. I could set the right people in the right places, depending on the correct people for certain things. I hear that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when corporate groups take the game together and they just do the game, uh, the experience is just a really an opening and a deepening of their rapport and their collegiality. They get to know each other better, and it's a wonderful team building experience. When the game is part of a larger program that may be another day or two or weeks or months, sometimes it's months or even a year-long program that gives people an opportunity to explore what they noticed in the game, became aware of, and actually start to practice different ways of interacting with each other, different ways of designing problems, solving problems together. Then it becomes a truly transformative opening experience for teams. And that's what the Samurai game often does with corporate groups when they approach it as part of a larger program. It becomes sort of the centerpiece for a real transformation in terms of their collaborative performance and their teamwork and their leadership cultivation.
And what about the value for organizations' leadership? Like, what if just the leadership team, the C-suite, the directors were to come together and just that? What would be the value for them?
I think all of the things we talked about, C-suite leaders are human beings. And my work is with C-suite leaders all the time. And they are like the rest of us. They face the same challenges, problems, opportunities. And They also are habitual human beings like everyone else. So they have deeply conditioned habits or patterns of thinking, of different ways of seeing things in habitual ways. And those habits are what always limit us. Our habits make things go easily and smoothly as long as things are going well. But when we encounter problems, when the world changes, or when we find ourselves facing situations that our habits don't address well, that's when it's time to start to see things differently. And like anybody else, leaders need opportunities that help them to take those blinders off the eyes and see things and see themselves in a new way and to think differently. And the Samurai game is great for that.
Um, I know as part of our facilitator training program, you said teens can do this, can do the samurai game.
Did you say teens?
Yeah, teens.
Teens, yeah.
Yeah. Can I know how young would you start? Would you allow one?
Well, if it's going to be, there are several facilitators who do a lot of work with youth, and they some have done it in middle school ages, so that's like 11 to 14. Of course, highly supervised. There's more adults in the room. Parents need to be
Definitely,
informed and give permission, of course.
definitely.
And you will make a couple of changes to the way the game is delivered, but it's basically still the game. And youth can get a lot out of it at those ages. If my policy is generally anybody under 16 needs to have a parent or guardian in the game with them. And but 16 and above, it depends on the child, of course, depends on the teen, and everyone is different. But I want to have fair level of confidence that the experience will be a good one for the person, and that it won't be overwhelming. So you need to know the youth that are going to be involved, and you need to have a sense that it's going to be an appropriate match for their level of development.
Right. And would you say that the value is actually the same for them?
Yeah, it is. They get to see themselves and each other very differently. They get to try on new roles. I mean, the great thing about young people doing the game is they get into the roles very readily, and they just give themselves to it. And uh, so, yeah, they bond. They learn about where they hold themselves back, where they throw themselves in, 100%. uh, how to ask for help, what do they do when they need to work with each other. All of the same lessons are there. It's just, for where they are in their lives, it's going to be, they're going to be translating it a little bit differently, of course.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you. It was good. Um, just a few more questions, very important ones. Uh, I think this is important for a number of people in the audience who have considered it. For what does it take, to become a samurai game facilitator? What are you looking for in candidates?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, what I look for is somebody fundamentally who is a learner, who really values uh, learning about themselves, and who is very committed to personal integrity. And it's helpful if people have experience working with groups. Group facilitation is helpful. It's not required, but being comfortable with groups of people, kind of being so-called in the front of the room, is helpful. And respect. really essential. I look for people who are profoundly respectful of other people, including other people who are very different than them. Without that, you cannot be a good facilitator, and you will not be a good facilitator. At least you won't go through my training. You because the game is all about respect. It's about letting people experience what they experience and get their own lessons. And if we believe that if the facilitator believes that they know how people should be behaving and what they should be learning, that's not going to be a good game.
Hmm.
That's what sets the Samurai game apart from every other training and development program. So I'm looking for people who are really clear that and committed to people learning what they're ready to learn. Those people,
Right.
and it's
Do
not.
you like
Yeah, that's not everybody. Some people just really like teaching and telling people, this is what I'm going to teach you, and this is what you should learn, and that's fine. There are a lot of places where that's important.
yeah?
It's just not what the Samurai game is about.
And I think that's what really attracts me about the Samurai game is that there really is nothing to teach. And it's all about the individual's readiness on what to learn about themselves. Yeah. That itself, for me, is very, it, I can see so much about myself up to the level that I'm ready to see. And that's why I've played the game twice, and both times, different outcomes, different
Yeah,
learning of myself. And
yeah.
I see that's how each individual going through the game, even playing it several times, can come out with different learning.
There are people who have participated in the game 10 times over years. And every time they tell us every time it's a completely different game. The structure of the game doesn't change. It's the same
Mhm.
game. Facilitator may be different, but the game is still the game, and yet it's completely different. And also interesting is that sometimes people come back years later and they realize that, oh, that's what I experienced in the game. That's what this was about. So there can be a delay for many
Mhm.
people, and it can kind of unfold over time, the learnings of the game. And facilitators need to be they need to respect that, the learning process. Not everybody is going to leave there having had a life changing cathartic experience.
Mhm.
Thankfully, that would be overwhelming,
All right. Yeah,
but people
I
learn.
agree. Mhm. So now that you are in charge of, charged with kind of training, coaching, facilitators, where do you see the Samurai game moving from here? What's your vision for this work?
Yeah. Well, I see these times we're living in they're so challenging in so many ways for so many people around the world. Just the polarization, the deep social polarization, the um, the tendency for people when they're afraid and feel threatened to go to these all or nothing positions where winning seems like the only option. And of course, that means that losing is the only option for people who don't agree. And that's a dangerous and a very difficult way to be in the world where there's only one right way, right answer, and everything else has to be wrong. And it's where we go when we get fearful. And a lot of things happening in the world today can be very frightening. So we're seeing a lot of that kind of thinking. I think the Samurai game is really a valuable opportunity for helping people to realize that winning and losing is not everything, and I don't need to win in order to I don't need to win everything in order to get along with you. You don't need to lose in order for me to feel successful and healthy and happy as a human being. There are alternatives to that, and the game can help to remind us of that and remind us of the humanity of diversity. And so, long-winded answer to your great question. I really want to see the game be available to more people in more parts of the world. So I'm looking for people who want to be facilitators of this, very unique experience. And I also see that the samurai game is an opening for many people. It's a door opening into a new world of self-discovery and of learning and self-development, both as individuals and as leaders in their communities and their work environments and their families. So it's applicable everywhere in all aspects of our lives. And I just think it has a lot to offer.
And where can someone train with you to become a facilitator? Because I understand that there are a few FTPs, facilitator training programs, coming up this year.
Well, we are coming back to your part of the world in September again.
Yay!
Kuala Lumpur. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. I hope you'll stop by. Yeah, that is going to be from September 20th to 30th. It's 11 days with 1 day off in the middle, 10 days of intense training and learning and practice and fun. And the other upcoming facilitator training program is going to be in the Dominican Republic. That's in the Caribbean. And that is July 29th through August 8th. And the way that people can learn about this more is on our website, the Samurai Game website, samuraigame.org. And you can click on the page, Becoming a Samurai Game Facilitator. And it talks a lot about the role of the facilitator and the training process, and it provides an application for signing up for the FTP. And everything you need to know, you can learn there about the program.
Mm-hmm. Right. So for our audience out there, if you're interested to finding out more about the FTP, the Facilitator Training Program, head over to samuraigame.org. Sorry, the Samurai Game or just Samurai Game?
It's www.samuraigame.org.
Right. For those of you in our audience, the ones back here in Malaysia at home, if you're interested to finding out more about the Samurai Game or playing it with Hard Knocks, feel free to head to our website. We've got one upcoming this year as well. And in the meantime, if you want to know more of the history or the FTP, head over to www.samuraigame.org. And so in closing, Grayson, before we let you go to the rest of your day, I'm sure it's pretty early. If you were to use one word to describe the Samurai Game, just one word, what would you use? What word would that be?
We'll go with mind blowing. And because there's a hyphen, that's one word.
Yes, I agree. I 100% agree. So thank you, Grayson, for being with us tonight. I had a really great time having this conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Danush. Great to see you again. Great to be with you.
Great to see you. And for the audience, thank you for tuning in to Heart Talk. We'll see you again next Monday. Let your heart do the talking. Good night.